quick overview of the agenda. First, we'll be talking again. Some of you may have already heard about our DOPT overview, but we'd like to do it just because there are always some new folks that join us for these workshops. So we're just going to give a really brief overview of our organization. Same with the Activate Rural program. And then we're going to share what we learned from this past Activate Rural workshop series from this past year, doing 3 virtual workshops and 2 in person, but also what you all can anticipate from a 2025 workshop series. And we'd love to hear from you all too during the Save the Dates and Q&A, getting your input on what you'd like to learn more about in 2025. We also will be sharing information about our coaching sessions and some other exciting developments that we have in the works for 2025. Next slide. And next slide. All right, our mission. We believe in the power of rural creativity and collaboration to address community challenges and opportunities. Like those of you here today, we believe that rural people and places have the answers they need to address community challenges, and we also recognize that a historic lack of equitable access to resources, economies of extraction, and narratives of deficit have fragmented many rural communities and made it challenging to support the projects and people seeking to do creative and inspiring work to benefit and better our communities. Work which we know is long-term and often generational in nature, which is why we have a 150-year vision. As our rural communities across the country acknowledge, support, and integrate art and artists as vital contributors to economic, community, civic, and social life. Next slide, please. As you will see from our organization's values of accessible play, deep compassion, reciprocal exchange, intentional representation, the topic of our topics that we cover in our workshop series and what we do in our Activate Rural program is all those topics are very close to our heart and are integrated. We always integrate our values into that work. Next slide. At DOPT, our work seeks to support rural communities by identifying and leveraging resources through artist-led, creative, cross-disciplinary, and cross-sector programs on local, regional, national, and national levels. Our local work is centered around Southwest Minnesota, where our home base, the Yes House, is located in Granite Falls, population of around 2,700. We also work across the state of Minnesota, supporting rural creative gathering spaces and artist-led activations. We work across the upper Midwest, supporting rural arts and cultural workers through at-home artist residencies, and on the national level as field strengtheners and advocates for geographic equity in philanthropy. Next slide. And this is our DOPT, our entire staff team here, including Benjamin and myself. Ash Hansen, who's on here with us, is our creative executive director. It's waving. Hey, Ash. We have Elisa, our communications coordinator, Hannah, and just to mention, and then Luana, our coordinator of the Yes House, Holly Dahl out in North Dakota. So our staff is located in various places around the country, some in Minnesota, some, like I mentioned, North Dakota, New Jersey, other parts of the country. Next slide. All right, and then we have different buckets of programming, which we have some examples of here shortly. So these are our main focus areas at DOPT. We have work around connect and connection. We have work around Activate, which you'll hear a lot more about because that's what our focus area here is about, Activate Rural, and our work with the Yes House building in Granite Falls. And then we have support, which is an example of our Ignite rural at-home artist residency program, and then Nurture, which we'll hear talk about in a minute, an example where it is supporting on a national level networking, storytelling, and research sharing. Next slide, please. All right, Activate. So I'm not going to talk too long here about Activate because we're going to talk about that here in a little brief moment. But this is an example here of a cohort gathering we did around our Activate Rural program, the Activate Rural Learning Lab specifically. Next slide. Support for rural artists. The Ignite Rural is an at-home artist residency supporting rural BIPOC and Native artists utilize creative approaches to work in and with their communities across the upper Midwest. Next slide. Beyond the Clock is an ongoing national network and digital learning exchange to uplift and connect rural cultural workers across the country. Next slide. And the Rural Civic Arts Partnership is about working with municipal leaders to expand the idea of civic arts in rural places and support the development of civic arts projects and residencies. Next slide. All right, now on to Activate Rural, an overview of Activate Rural. Next slide. All right, so Activate Rural is a learning lab and workshop series that's designed to offer support, peer learning, and resources to artists, creative entrepreneurs, organizations, and small business owners, and cultivating welcoming and creative physical places of connection in rural communities and the Native nations that share this geography. Next slide. Here's an update, or it's an ongoing, working framework, but we wanted to share an update that we've done based on our learning so far in the past 2 years, really, of Activate Rural program. This is our artist-led asset activation. So previously, we've always had activation, assets, and artists, but we've added the accountability, transparency in the middle because it's always a part of any project, any Activate Rural building an activation project. But then also the growth and impact piece of it, and how it used to be a triangle, but now we're making it more of a circle because it's always a continuous cycle that you're moving through these different focus areas as a part of this framework. So some definitions here. Next slide. Artists. So an artist is a big part of our framework, a big key piece of our Activate Rural program, and that we work with artists. And our definition of artists is broad. It is anyone who is creative, resourceful, inspired, and driven to collaborate across all sectors of public, private, and civic life. It includes all mediums, such as multimedia, literary, culinary, textile, traditional, folk. We mean culture bearers, craftspeople, artisans, hobbyists, contractors, and handy people. An activator is anyone that is an organizer, connector, cheerleader, leader in their community. They're the individuals in a community that say yes to projects that may seem big and scary. They're the ones that'll jump on board and support it right away. And you know who they are in your community. They're usually the folks that are around you, your friends, family, the people that can see your vision and support it from the beginning. And there's many different definitions of asset. There are social, cultural assets in communities, many other variations. But with the Activate Rural program, we are focused on physical spaces, buildings specifically. So the places that were either former gathering places like churches, schools, cafes, and now maybe they're being transformed into artists and creative spaces, gallery spaces, artist housing, um, coffee shops, whatever they take on a new life. And so this Activate World program, we're focused on those physical gathering spaces in yeah, in former in commercial buildings and these buildings that serve different purposes in the past. They are the places that help shape, define, and tell your community story. All right, and then a little bit about the Learning Lab. So the Learning Lab started in early 2023, and we selected through a open call, a statewide open call here in Minnesota. We selected 5 community projects, teams, and they're listed right there on our map there. They're the City of Buell, Monument Arts Initiative, Reclaim Community, Minnesota Arts, and Spring Grove Cinema. And so we have a regional project in different regions of the state, and each one received $25,000 for artist-led community engagement and for admin operating support. They also receive individually created technical assistance from myself and Benjamin. We work really closely with each group uh, through to help them through whatever phase they're in during their building, whether they have a building yet or in the idea phase, or whether they're in the middle of construction and capital campaigning, or whether it's in an existing space that they're trying or rethinking and reimagining into a different type of space. We also provide relational work and cohort peer network, exchange visits, cohort workshops, and gatherings. And and I don't know, I just want to say, like, keep an eye out for 2026 because we're really excited and hopeful that we'll be able to do a second cohort. So just be sure to be on our keep tabs on DOPT, follow us on social media, and make sure that you're on our list for receiving our weekly newsletter. Next slide, please. Activate Rural, for both the workshop series and the Learning Lab, we are working towards equitable access to financial and social capital, process transparency, and public participation. So around that process transparency and public participation, that's where the accountability and transparency work really shows up. And then the financial and social capital, we're working on mapping different financial systems within each region of the state of Minnesota and figuring out uh, what what are the gaps in capital projects and where do we need to do more advocating and finding more resources to make capital projects focused on creative, welcoming spaces more possible. Next slide, please. All right, and then now we're on to the workshop series. So in 2025, we've already had 2 in-person workshops this past year, one in Southwest Minnesota in Granite Falls at the Yes House, and then a second one up on the Iron Range in Buell, Minnesota at their senior center or community center. And both workshops, the in-person ones were about connecting people from different regions of the state that are working on building projects, whether they're individuals or nonprofit groups or cooperative entities. They all came together to share, connect with each other, share resources, and also for us to share what we're learning with the Yes House project and from our organization as well. And then the virtual workshops you'll hear more about it here in a minute, but we have another 3 virtual workshops planned for 2025. And then we have 2 additional in-person workshops. The ones that will happen in June of 2025 will be in Monoman, Minnesota. And then September of 2025, there'll be one in Spring Grove. And we'll talk more about the coaching sessions here in a little bit. Next slide. All right, now what we learned. Excellent. All right, so just a quick stat before I hand it over to Benjamin to talk about some of the things, or kind of a snapshot, is that and just to show like that snapshot of what we learned, um, what how many people that reflects. And so through the virtual workshop series and in-person workshops, we had a total of 100, sorry, I got one, 870 people register for all six, yeah, no, five, sorry, I learned how to add five workshops. And then over 750 unique businesses or entrepreneurs that represented that 870. And then representing those people registered from 49 different states, five tribal nations, and three different countries. So we had a lot of, and I wanted to share these numbers to share that you're not alone in doing the work that you're doing or supporting this type of work in your own community or region or state. That there is a lot of interest in activating spaces, specifically around buildings, creative spaces, gathering places for rural communities. And now, Benjamin, I'll have you share a little bit, yeah, just this graphic.
I get to share a graphic. I get to describe it. But mainly, you take all those people, and you ask them to write things about what they're learning, what they're experiencing, what their needs are, and you throw it into one of these word cloud generators, which chops out all the extraneous words, and we're left with some really interesting things here. And if you take a look here, you'll notice that the thing that everybody seemed to be mentioning was a community.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's just such an interesting word as we come into 2025. It's some people might call it a buzzword. I don't call it a buzzword. I just call it one of the most important words to our program here. But the word cloud itself actually did something kind of funny that Serena and I were talking about just the other day, which is you can see that we need technical support for building community engagement, and just ignore the word marketing there because everyone needs help with marketing. But yeah, so just think about that. Need technical support, building community engagement. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're going to talk about some workshops now that we are trying to do that with. Back to you, Serena.
Thank you. Yeah, so we wanted to provide a summary or basically revisit our virtual workshops that we've done this past year because there were a lot of takeaways, a lot of learnings from each one. And I actually spent this past week watching the recordings. So I was like, yeah, what was, what were the takeaways and what were the that I know that resonated with folks when they listened to each of these workshops. And so this first one was around multi-use creative spaces in rural communities. And we had Heidi from the Firefly Center for Art and Wellbeing, Chris from Madison Mercantile, and Luana from the Yes House share about each of those building projects. They're all within, yeah, commercial downtown areas within their communities, all communities of around 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, that small rural community. And they all had many things happening. And when I say many things, it's not just a gallery and that's it. It's a lot of these spaces are gallery, coffee shop, artist studios, economic development office, recording studio, climbing wall, artist apartment. You know what I mean. Like, so there's like it's a building space that's has many different functions, even different businesses functioning out of the space, out of one space. Next slide. So takeaways from this webinar and workshop was that in a common thread through the three of those guest speakers were that each of those projects created opportunities for community to provide input as to what was needed. So a lot of those spaces came up with what was needed in those project or in those spaces organically. So some of them just opened up the space, let people come in and tell them, hey, what is needed in our community? and they kept it open and then made it happen, tried out different programming, different events, different spaces to see what worked in the within the space and if it was a demand for the community. So all three projects had opportunities for community input and a community-led process in that way. There are also hubs of creativity, entrepreneurship, and well-being. There was a focus on those three different components when it came to creating those spaces. Also, a focus on welcoming environments. There was talk around how the spaces were for everyone, not just a certain segment of the community, all ages, backgrounds. Yeah, so it's trying. They're all working towards that, creating a welcoming environment for everyone. Also, community engagement integrated in everything they did, including programming, events, and development of the spaces, like I mentioned earlier. But even the programming and events, they wanted the community to be a part of those processes. And each project had a different way of doing it, and different approach to how to integrate community input in terms of programming and events that went on in the space. But that all was a key. That all was a part of each of the way that they function. And then some of the learnings was I know from one especially she mentioned I think Chris from Madison Mercantile established a solid accounting system and legal system for yourself. Like for example, well written leases, especially if there is a mix of businesses and nonprofits. So, for example, in her project, she has standalone businesses within that share space with other nonprofits. And so, just making sure that there were uh, basically clear lines between them so that financials and legal stuff is well accounted for. And then having a mix of for profit and nonprofit within a building space allowed for more funding opportunities. A couple of the presenters talked about how actually having a mix benefited them in that way, and that they could tap into different resources depending on if it was for the for profit entity or for the nonprofit, but it benefited the entire building as a whole. All right, and there are probably many other takeaways, but those were a quick synopsis of that workshop. Next slide, please. So the second workshop we had was around courageous and compassionate creative places with Nancy, with Cadets Galleries out of Fergus Falls, and then Bethany Little Theater Auditorium out of New London, Minnesota. And each of their building spaces and organizations were actually long time established spaces and organizations. And long time meaning over 10 years. They had operated in a certain way for many years. And then both Nancy, as the executive director, talked about how they've been, and Bethany, as also the director of their space, how they've made changes based on community needs and wants as well. Next slide. And I should mention one was more of a gallery artist studio space, and the other one is more of like a theater performance venue space. But again, all have other parts of it as well. And so the takeaways from that one was making a safe space for everyone, everybody, and safe space to share in whatever art form, um, and also for the LGBTQ2IA community as well. So just making it more of again, that welcoming piece, but also safe for individuals to express themselves in these spaces. Activating public spaces and community stories. So it wasn't just about their space, but also how are they engaging in other public spaces within the community, whether it's parks and other city infrastructure spaces, to spill out kind of that with the really cool things that are happening within the space, but sharing that with other parts of the community. And then there was a lot of talking about cultivating partnerships. So even if they were long-term time established organizations, there's always a need to like re-engage, whether it's their local city, um, or economic development entity, other nonprofits in the area, either doing similar work or, or even completely different work. That need is always there to keep building those relationships, and cultivating. I know one of the speakers talked about how that partnership with the city really enabled them to do more, like I said earlier, around the public spaces and around community stories. Also talking about trying new things. They get to, this is kind of more of a, almost a exactly what one speaker said. We get to try new things, new programs, and thinking about what are the small incremental things that we can do as a result. Because they're established space, they can try out new things, and see what works, but doing it in those incremental steps so that you can build. Again, change is possible. Change can be big, but it's slow. So it can feel slow, but you're still doing those incremental steps to get to that big change. And then lastly, community-centric fundraising strategies versus traditional methods of fundraising. So there was discussion around how can we be more creative with, fundraising strategies, especially in long time established organizations that have maybe been doing the same thing over and over. And so how do you think about, doing things differently, but again, more focused on a community-centric model? All right. And then our last virtual workshop that we had back in September was around creative places for youth with Mackenzie Ham at Cornerstone Community and Youth Center, and then with Ann Thompson with a Greater Milan Initiative. So, one space was a former church building and the other was a former school building. So pretty large, very large spaces, but, both have a focus on youth and youth programming, youth spaces within each of the buildings, even though they're doing other stuff as well within the buildings, like a coffee shop um, or a thrift store or gym, other pieces of it, just because they are very large buildings. Next slide. So some of the takeaways from that session, was around, I noticed when both were speaking that both of these building spaces, because it was a former school and a former church, that there were deep connections to those buildings and spaces. And when I say deep connections, that means that, they already have a network of people that love and love those buildings and love and have memories of those spaces because they touch a lot of lives within a rural community, a school and a church building. People have milestone moments in those spaces, and they, each of the projects, I think they were able to tap into that and even helped with their fundraising strategies, their connecting with programming and youth, and already provided that network of people because they remember being in those spaces for other reasons, and now they want to come back, for that creative space that they have. So just, and also it tied into the leaders that made those spaces, the deep connections of the guest speakers. That's why they're doing the work they are doing, because they also have, deep connections to those buildings. Youth play a role in both cases in organizational leadership, vision and mission development, planning of events, and caring for those creative, like ongoing maintenance and caring, of those creative spaces. So they both talked about, they both had different ways of doing it, but, it was a key part of, making sure that youth played a vital role in their organization and spaces. Artists and art activate the spaces and community before and after moving into the building space. So even doing work, even if they don't have the building space quite yet, they're doing, art projects and working with artists outside of that. And then one quote, our old building is our biggest asset, but also our biggest challenge. So there are always capital projects. I think that was specifically around the school, but that happens a lot. Any building projects, you think you're done once you finish that first, initial renovation, but there's always something that comes up in buildings and needing something, especially when it's an old and they're doing it in different phases. Intergenerational programming events were a big part of both projects, building relationships between seniors and youth, and then a need for more capital funding and grants. That was talked about a lot and something we advocate as well with the Activate Rural programming here at DOPT. All right, that's an overview of the 3 virtual workshops that we've had. Next slide. And then now we have some save the dates and what's coming up as we wrap up our info session here. So we have a summit planned, a virtual Activate Rural Summit. So you all from wherever you're, uh, you know, coming in through or wherever you're located, you'll be able to join because it will be virtual over a week. It won't be a completely all day, week long thing, but we'll have multiple workshops about an hour to an hour and a half long on each of those days during that week of October 20th to the 24th. So just save the date. Planning is in progress, and we're excited to share, yeah, what you can expect during that. That'll be our first one, our first Activate Rural virtual summit. And then also we have in the works for 2025 that will be completed, hopefully. I'm not going to make a complete promise, but our goal is to have it done, our Atlas document that really documents what has happened over the past 2 years with our learning lab cohort teams, highlighting their projects, and then what we're learning as a part of this work over the past 2 years. So that'll be available for download closer again to that summit timeframe. All right, next slide. Go ahead, Benjamin.
Oh, that's me. I get to talk again. Yeah. So if I do my job, that atlas will be ready for all of us next
Mm.
October. But you don't have to wait until then. If you are in Minnesota, we offer coaching sessions. That's right. You can schedule 30-minute to hour-long sessions with me and Serena, and we're here to help support your project in any way you can think. If you just want to talk through an idea, if you need help creating documents or templates for your project, if you're looking for some resources or connections and you don't know where to start, ask us. We might have an avenue for you to explore. And even at the very end, though, it may be a coaching session, but really we're great cheerleaders, so we can super support you through our experience and just with a little bit of empathy too, which we all need from time to time. So yeah, if you're in Minnesota, these are being offered for free because we have a grant from the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. If you're outside of Minnesota, send us a message and see what we can do. But yes, on the follow-up email I'll be sending after our info session today, there will be a link for Minnesota residents to schedule a coaching session. But yeah, that's that. Let's move along to the next slide. Back to you, Serena.
All right, and then to share our tentative, and I say tentative because these dates may change, but for now, I mean, we have scheduled our future, our 2025 workshop schedule. So February is when you can expect our first virtual Activate Rural workshop. So early next month, you'll probably see emails from us asking if you'd like to register. And this time for our virtual workshop series, we will be focused on more of a certain topic focus area, for example, capital campaigns around a building project. But we will still be talking about people that are doing the work, that are actually, uh, developing a creative space and working within, for example, if they're running a capital campaign. We want to hear directly from them what their experience is, what are they learning, what are the mistakes, what's happening, all that. So we will continue having the 2 guest speaker format and really focus in on specific topics like that. And then we have our in-person one on June 24th, if you're in that region of the state of Minnesota, in around Mahnomen. And then in July will be our last virtual Activate Rural workshop for 2025. I was trying to remember the year. Like, yes, 2025. And then September, we don't have an exact date yet for that one, but that'll be our next in-person one. All right. That is what we have to share with all of you. And now, if you are open to it, I have a question for you all, and feel free to type it in the chat or to unmute yourself and share. But what type of project challenges and opportunities would you like to learn more about in 2025?
I think for me, I would love to figure out more ways to bring non-traditional post-secondary education to our rural communities in a way that they accept.
Okay. I haven't heard that one. That's interesting. All right. That'd be cool to explore. Any other topics that you all would like to hear more about? Or types of building projects?
We have a chat comment that says capital campaigns. We're always interested in what that means and how to do that.
Nate?
I, there was just enough silence that I thought maybe I could throw this in your direction, Serena. It may be a bit distant from what you're actually asking. So there's a property in Renville County, Minnesota, and it's an armory, and it'll be vacant over the course of next year. And I've been coordinating with the city and a few other agencies trying to come up with a best use for that space. Um, However, last week I was at a different meeting, very similar to yours, where I was reintroduced to the concept of welcoming space.
Mhm.
And architecturally, that's not the design. Now, I know there's magic you can work with architectural, simple and inexpensive things you can do to make it. But in your experience, is this a project that maybe wouldn't meet that criteria, or is there hope? I mean, there's dozens of things that need to be addressed, but it'd be a shame to put it all together only to discover that psychologically the steep brick stairs to get in and the design, the intimidating design would turn uh young people away. I mean, there's so many different subcategories of your community that the
Right.
last place they want to go is to the old armory. Or am I overthinking it? But it's come up now twice in 2 weeks. You can An otherwise well-intentioned program, it can be a little thing, well, not a little thing, a hard thing to detect ahead of time, and then it kind of gets in the way.
I mean, one of the most popular music venues in Minneapolis is the Armory, which is an interesting thing. Lots of young people go there. But Jen, you have your hand raised.
So when I was at the crisis nursery in Springfield, Illinois, we were exploring a new space for us to use. And there was a unused temple that they had outgrown their space, and we thought we could transform it into a really neat space for us. I was really, really lucky that I had an architect on my board that he was able to do a walkthrough and really evaluate and see, like, can we do what we need to meet the criteria for this building? So if you've got an architect that might be willing to give you a gift in kind of their services to just do an evaluation, that might help ease some of your fears.
Well, thank you. We did have an architect we were gifted. Swift donated an architect's time to evaluate it from a childcare perspective, um, which was daunting enough. But we did spend a lot of time thinking about how are these little people going to navigate just the stairs when they're just learning walking. I mean, how many children are we going to injure just getting them up into the main door? So,
I can't remember. Do you guys up there have crisis nurseries in Minnesota?
I don't know, actually.
I don't know either, and it's a shame that you don't. Um, but I would reach
we
out
don't
and look
need
at
them.
some
We
of
don't
those.
have crisis here.
Never.
Never. Um, but those are some of the issues that your daycares and crisis nurseries that we operate in. We used to operate in a 3-story building that was an old home, and so we had to do some modifications. It's a pain, but it's well worth it.
Mhm. Calvin, did
Well,
you have
thank
something
you.
to say?
Yeah. I don't know about the stairs, but the Armory Center in Pasadena, California, I dropped the link to it, is an old armory, and they have transformed it beautifully. And the space that we're using is an old jail, and we have a lot of um, we struggle with it being a jail and people coming into a space that is a jail, but we're 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 developing dialogue around that fact, and it's going really well.
Well, thank you for the link because I absolutely, a little bit of dialogue might go a long ways.
Mhm.
Thank you. And thank you for giving me the stage for that, Serena. It may have helped. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I was hoping others here had that they already knew and had knowledge to share because but I it brings up actually one of our ideas for a one of the workshop is around design. And so I didn't think about that angle around, the former what a building like a jail or an armory represented previously and how yeah, the transformation of it and the design, like how you have to be really intentional about it. But then I'm sure community engagement plays a big role in that as well. And yeah, I could see there's a lot of it would be cool to have a session around that as well.
Mhm.
And then I saw someone share here expand on how to work with multiple makers and or owners financially.
And that's a really tough one that I have found. Um, I mean, just in the last 2 days, I've had some conversations about, restrictive funding that, certain departments can't apply for certain other departments' funding. But, what are the restrictions around, if only counties can apply, can the county apply for it and then gift that to the state park? Like, could we talk about flexibilities like that the county is addressing a need, but they're not going to own it once you gift it to them?
And do you mean like grant dollars or an actual asset of a building or whatever?
Right now, it's grant dollars that we're looking
Okay.
at. The EPA's got some funding available for HVAC renewals,
Hmm.
and only counties and municipalities can apply. But my state park down the road needs a new HVAC for their concession and showers.
Right. It's yeah, federal level funding is yeah, they're very not as flexible in my past experience with that kind of thing.
They are not, and that's actually why I like this the nonprofit setup that I've got going here, because we do have that flexibility with our mission statement that as long as the project helps families, that we can assist.
Right.
So, we can collect funds for a dedicated project, and they're all restricted to just going to that, no matter who it belongs to. So,
Right. All right. And just to share, I did see someone, I think it was Calvin, that shared about the capital campaign part. And we do have actually plans, I believe, I'm anticipating the February virtual workshop will be focused on capital campaigns.
that's a really good point. Also, do you guys have you ever incorporated any of the ideas from the Chautauqua movement in these projects?
No, I don't think. I'm not familiar.
Oh, I want to send you some links. Um,
All right. Yeah, feel free. Actually, Benjamin, could you share? I think we have our email on the next slide. Oh, there you go. Yeah, if you'd like to follow up, um, that's our email for myself and for Benjamin. Yeah, and I just wanted to leave some room for any questions about 2025, what's expected, or even of the Activate World program. I'll open it up to that too, more of a general, if you have questions.
It's my thing.
Yeah, Marie, got your hand raised.
Yeah, so I just have a question just in general. I am looking at and maybe this is not the organization to work with, and that's I guess why I'm bringing this up at this point. I'm not at the point where I'm thinking of necessarily transforming a space so much as I am increasing the connections of the people in a community
Mm-hmm.
and using art and creativity and to do that. And my question about the going back to the comment about the multi makers and things. I have a young woman that I know who has a coffee truck, and she wanted to get a physical space in a local community where I have been doing a lot of age friendly work and dementia work, and she found a space and was talking to the owner in the EDA, and they were going to be looking at it. And she went in when she went to find out exactly how much he wanted for the space per square foot. It was outrageous for the community and nothing she could do. She couldn't afford to do it. There's no way in a small community that on her own she could do that. And I did suggest to her looking at maybe going and setting up um, because where I used to have a coffee shop, there's now a restaurant that doesn't have an espresso machine. So I said, well, I know that the plumbing's there. So maybe you could set up your system there and work with them, and you could do the drinks and they wouldn't have to deal with that part of it. They could do the food part. But then she became very concerned about how do you do that? Do you run it through one register? Or does she have to have a separate one? Then people have to pay two different people. And that's cumbersome. And so there are all sorts of little details like that come up when you've got situations where you can't afford to do the $1,000
Yeah,
square
I
foot
get
kind of thing.
that would be that is something even projects that I'm working with or groups that I'm working with are grappling with the same, figuring out how do you set up a system where there's multiple businesses within a very either small space or even sharing a kitchen space or sharing
Mm-hmm.
um Like, say, I know one is like a pub during the evening, but they want to be a coffee place in the morning, but a different business doing that. Like, how does that? Because especially in rural communities, they're trying to figure out how to share spaces,
Right.
cut down on costs so that they can function as a business and sustain themselves, but not have all that overhead, you know, and maintaining a building, all that cost with it.
Right. And even like where, where I'm talking about is doing, there are restaurants that in some cases they're not, well, in some cases they aren't open till lunch. And I
Right.
realize they have prep time, but
Hmm.
the town doesn't have a coffee shop anymore. So it's like, well, can we open this up for coffee? Because you have coffee with your lunch and your dinner. So can we open it up and have someone else function out of that part and do that part of it? And then you just take over, but it gets to be complicated, and it's a trust thing on people, and in a lot of these smaller communities, because they aren't supported, the businesses aren't supported, because they don't have enough people, or they're too close to another bigger community that people go and buy things there. Um, the restaurants, food businesses tend to turn over.
Right.
And then you don't know, is this person, where's the trust in that kind of situation? So anyway, I don't want to get
Yeah,
too in the weeds,
I
but
will.
that's where my head is and where I'm
Right.
working on that.
No, that's a reoccurring question and topic that has come up. So yeah, I'm definitely gonna think about. It'd be cool to have a session specifically around that, like diving deep into it. No, like really, how do you do it? How do you divide out like everything? I think that would be interesting.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
All right. So we have yeah, we need to wrap up. We have a minute. So I just wanted to say thank you all again for attending this info session and getting a sneak peek into what we have planned for 2025. But really, mostly, I really appreciate each of you sharing topic ideas and what we should focus on for next for 2025 and even beyond. And I want to encourage you to reach out to myself or Benjamin, as a follow up, or if you have questions about anything specifically that we mentioned during this info session. Benjamin, do you have any last logisticy things?
Nope, not for me.
All
Just
right.
look forward to that follow-up email with the link and looking forward to talking more in the future.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all and have a great holiday season. Bye.
Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year.